Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with the Great War. We are on to week 6. This time, the Battle of Galicia. Plans are doomed to fail. Well, yeah, plans will fail the moment they meet the enemy. Can't remember who the fuck quote that's from. I just know I've heard it a lot. Before we dive into the video, though, make sure you check out the links below in my description box or in my pinned comment in the comment section down below. Got a link to my gaming channel here on YouTube and a link to my Twitch channel. Would love it if you threw me a follow and hung out in the chat. All right. Plans are doomed to fail. Let's go ahead and get right into the
September 4th, 1914. After a month of fighting, the nations of Europe now all knew that this was a new type of war, with carnage on a scale never before seen. But the technology...
They finally have realized. It only took them 5 full weeks.
And logistics of modern warfare also brought with it a whole slew of unforeseen problems, especially as the war was about to go global and truly become a world war.
Dun dun dun.
I'm Indy Nidell, and this is the Great War. Here's how the war looked at the beginning of the week. A Russian army had been spectacularly destroyed by the Germans at Tannenberg. The British and French were retreating to regroup around Paris, the Germans hot on their heels, and the whole world was now telling tales of German and Austrian executions of civilians in occupied territories.
Yeah, even so, that's one thing you don't do in war. Execute civilians, but also like treat prisoner of war with respect. The reason being is that there have been a lot of studies done. Mao Zedong, one of the communists in Japan after World War II, a lot of these communists, a lot of them Japanese communists, had been prisoners of war during the Sino-Japanese War. They were fighting China in the late 30s and 40s, and they had been captured by Mao Zedong because Mao treated prisoners with respect, right? He treated them well. And then now, of course, civilians are, I guess, slightly different. I don't know the treatment of civilians, but I'm going to take the assumption here that you also want to treat the civilians of the enemy nation with the same respect you're going to treat their soldiers, because obviously that's how you pacify an enemy, right? In war, you want to pacify an enemy if you want to conquer them. You kind of want to be nice to them. Germany's not doing that here. That's one way to make the war harder on yourself. But also, I think Sun Tzu even says it. Like, obviously, like, the tactics in Sun Tzu, like a lot of the things Sun Tzu says, it's kind of very, let's be real, basic kind of strategy. It's, to us, it seems like stuff that would be common sense, but of course, he wrote that so fucking long ago that I guess it wasn't common sense back then, but such common sense to us, because they're pretty simple things in there. But he also says, treat the prisoners of war well, treat them nice, because then obviously that makes post-war easier on you and stuff. You can also turn that enemy into a friend. Boom, got someone possibly fighting for you. That was a very oversimplification.
War had always had its fair share of difficulties, right? Transportation, supplies, and communications always seemed to go wrong, and World War I was no exception. But we begin to see that almost anything could screw up the best laid plans on an extraordinary scale. Let's take a look at the war in the East. The Russian army may have just suffered a catastrophic defeat against Germany, but they were doing a lot better against Austria-Hungary. Now the Russians...
Everyone was doing better against the Austro-Hungarians. If the Austro-Hungarians were to fight each other, I think they'd just kill themselves.
outnumbered the empire roughly 700...
Like, literally. Like, they would find a way to end up shooting themselves. That's how bad the Austro-Hungarians seem right now.
50,000 to 500,000 in troops, and had an even greater advantage in machine guns and artillery. Austria-Hungary, though, had won 2 quick victories over the Russians, but it was all downhill from there. Austrian Chief of Staff Konrad von Hotzendorf was overconfident, and he had a complicated plan to let the Russians in the south advance and then swing around them in the north.
Never make complicated plans. Never. They never work. It's always best to just keep things simple.
See, Hotzendorf was one of the major Austrian war hawks, dreaming of a glorious empire that stretched down to Africa and even to the Middle East.
Like, the German plan is very simple. It's pretty much fucking blitz France. Just storm France and hope the Russians don't mobilize quick. Very simple plan. The French plan, hold off the Germans. Pretty simple. Austro-Hungarian's plan, we're going to let the Russians come in just a little bit on this one specific front. And then on this other front, we are going to swing around them. Big brain. Why the fuck?
But in practical terms, it was a terrible general. He sort of ignored the fact that the Russians were heavily reinforcing in the north. And by September 1st, they began to bear down on Conrad.
How the fuck is this guy still how has he not been fired? How? Does he have some super immense political connections that's keeping him from being fired? Because I feel like the other nations would have removed him from that army position. I feel like, okay, maybe Nicholas II wouldn't have removed him, but I feel like Moltke would have removed him, or Kaiser Wilhelm II would have probably removed him if he wasn't showing results or whatever. I feel like definitely the French and especially the English would have removed him from power, removed him from his position as a general. What the fuck, Austria?
With close to twice as many men as the Austrians had. Russia took Lemberg, one of the largest cities in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, on September the 3rd, and Austria was forced to retreat to the Carpathian foothills. So far this war, Austria-Hungary had been in a constant state of disaster, partly because of overstretch, but partly because of incompetence. This
partly? Like, mainly because of incompetence.
Would not change, but there were also totally unforeseen problems, chronic language difficulties being a big one.
I feel like that shouldn't have been an unforeseen problem. I feel like that should have been a very evident problem within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. That has been a problem for a long time within the empire, so I'm going to disagree here. I think this is the first time I'm going to disagree with you, Indy. I think it's the first time. I don't think that's an unforeseen problem. I think that was a problem that was prevalent, that they knew existed. They just didn't care. Like the general that's fucking everything up for the Austro-Hungarians. I feel like, again, the higher-ups just didn't care. They were just so overly confident in themselves. Like, they felt that the language barrier wouldn't prove an issue. I highly doubt that, because the Austro-Hungarian Empire has ruled this land for quite a long time, and so they have fought quite a few wars in that time. I feel like they would get they would know at the very least there's gonna be a language barrier. That what I said makes sense.
The Austrian army had soldiers from all the many nations of its empire. Hungarians, Czechs, Bosnians, you name it. And troops from one region would repeatedly attack others of its own army, mistaking them for Russians.
Oh my fucking god, they did fight each other. They found a way to shoot themselves without fighting each other, without being in a civil war. Oh my god.
Because of the unfamiliar language. And the Slavic troops would simply desert at times because of being made to fight other Slavs, and sometimes even join the Russian army. There were also the huge open spaces of Eastern Europe. Units would become lost, sometimes for days, and just finding the enemy was a daunting task.
Oh my god.
Now, Russia had problems of its own, though. Although it had an endless supply of men, it could only afford to feed and clothe a fraction of them in an army. So you could avoid the draft for a variety of reasons, like if you were the family's main breadwinner. So in early August, for example, 2 million Russians suddenly got married, which would be funny if the ones who went to war weren't all dying. The problems of modern warfare were also being felt in the West.
I'm sorry, I laughed. He said it wasn't. Well, he kind of said it would be funny. I'm fucked up.
but in different ways. The Franco-British retreat had started. British commander John French was considering retreating beyond Paris, though, and when he learned that the last Belgian fortress had fallen to the Germans, he thought of abandoning the whole thing and retreating all the way to Saint-Nazaire on the Atlantic coast. He had nothing but disdain for his allies, especially his opposite number, French General Lanzerac. Now, Commander French said that the French army was the sort of people that he did not wish to continue fighting with, which is insane.
I love the accent. I loved it.
I mean, they were at war. They were allies. But the retreat was managed really well. No big guns were captured, and there was never any danger of being surrounded. Now, part of this was that the French army now had a huge advantage: the French railway system. They could move around troops lots faster than the Germans could follow on foot. And follow on foot they often had to do. The automobile was still a fairly new creation, and most of the thousands of German trucks used broke down this month. The Belgians had, of course, sabotaged their own railways, and it would take weeks for the Germans to get them in order again. The Germans had problems not only with their cars, though, but also big ones with their horses, which were, by this point, dropping dead on the roadside from hunger and exhaustion, but were needed to haul the dreaded German guns.
The horsies.
The German armies were following the sweep of the Schlieffen Plan, but on September 2nd, this changed. Instead of going to the west of Paris, they were now diverted to head east of it. This was because of good defense. One German army was stopped by Lanzerac at Guise and forced to head southeast, and the other had faced strong British support the whole way, and the sweep was abandoned. Lanzerac was a very cautious general, and though he was repeatedly ordered by his superiors to counterattack during the retreat, he wouldn't, saying he wanted to wait until open ground to use his artillery. Eventually, even with Lanzerac's success stopping the German advance, he was removed from command for being too cautious. Now, British Commander French was happy when Lanzerac was relieved of command, but he was far from happy when Lord Kitchener, British Secretary of State for War himself, had arrived in full Field Marshal dress uniform at the end of August to meet directly with French and tell him to damn well work together with his allies and not simply retreat to safety. The British remained near Paris.
Man, I wonder, a great what if right there. What if Kitchener hadn't commanded that and allowed French to abandon the French?
The Schlieffen Plan, as it was conceived, might have been successful if Moltke hadn't diverted so many of his troops away. He had pulled troops away to fight the Russians, troops to fight Antwerp, for the fortress of Namur, but, that's war. So as the armies neared Paris, the German armies were now reduced in size to below that of the French and British, and they were much lower in ammunition. Now you can see that this was a bed of roses for nobody at all. And something else we start to see around now. This war was no longer a European land war, but was becoming an actual world war on both land and sea. Japan and Britain had had an alliance since 1902, and in mid-August, Japan demanded that Germany withdraw her warships from Chinese and Japanese waters and hand over the port of Tsingtao. And on August 23rd, Japan declared war on Germany. The Japanese landed 23,000 troops beginning September 2nd for the siege of Tsingtao, which would last all autumn. Kaiser Wilhelm said, "It would shame me more to surrender Tsingtao to the Japanese than Berlin to the Russians." He said a lot of stuff like that. New Zealand had its first engagement of the war, occupying German Samoa on August 29th to take the radio station there, one of several stations the Germans had in the Pacific. Now, the occupation took place without fighting, but it brought the war to the Pacific. This was not the first seizure of a German colony during the war, though, Togo having surrendered to the British and French 3 days earlier. And for Britain on her home islands, this was a dangerous time. Since the entire professional army had been sent to Belgium, and Germany had plenty of troops available to land in the east of England, there was a prospect of invasion. And with a bit of luck, an invading force might elude the Royal Navy. But on August 28th...
That would take a lot of luck, though. I mean, I guess if... See, this would rely... It's highly unlikely. But this... I can understand the fear by British High Command. However, I mean, yeah, early 1900s, they wouldn't really have the capability of spotting uh con like landing troops like they can in World War II. So, yeah, the fear is actually more probable then of landing ships sneaking by, because I don't think they had planes in use yet, and especially I don't think they'd be flying the planes over the North Sea. So actually, shit, the Germans could have performed a small invasion. I mean, it depends. It so depends. Because obviously, I think the British people would have fought tooth and nail to defend their homes from an invading German force. So, who knows? Yeah. But I guess, yeah, the possibility of them sneaking a force by the Navy and landing some troops, not out of realm of possibility there.
At Heligoland, 3 German cruisers were destroyed by the British without a ship sunk, ending the threat. This was the first real naval engagement of the war, and as you all know, it was very far from the last. So now, we have an actual world war on 3 continents, which brings with it all of the new problems of modern warfare. And though many of these are still connected with transportation, communication, supplies, and even language, they're on a scale like never before. And just as all problems in war cost lives, we'll see millions die as nations try to get a grip on 20th century warfare. We'll see you next week. Click here to see last.
And that was Plans Are Doomed to Fail. Battle of Galicia. Great War. Beak Stick. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I will see you guys. Peace.